Hello and welcome to the Kim Iverson Show. We do have a lot to cover tonight. Israel has given a warning to the WHO that they're going to bomb them. I always suspected the WHO was a terrorist organization, so I guess this confirms it. Ukraine funds are running out in 3 weeks, and you won't believe some of the arguments used to keep the funds going. The argument that it's not really money for Ukraine, but it's for Americans. We're going to go over that tonight. Also, several GOP senators are calling for a travel ban with China over a new circulating respiratory illness. And also, Democrats in Florida have decided to cancel the primary and declare Joe Biden the winner because they're all about democracy. All of that is coming up tonight. But first, Tucker Carlson is speaking out. He's been interviewed on a few shows where he's now revealed why he was fired. Here he is talking to Roseanne Barr about it.
Well, it's just, yeah.
You felt, remember I sent you that video when you got fired about, it was you and it was a guy with your head, but he was tap dancing and he was getting thrown out and then he starts flying. Remember that? Do you feel like you're flying?
Well, I was not surprised. I mean, of course I was surprised. I didn't expect to get, my show canceled Monday morning, but I wasn't, if I took 3 steps back, I was not surprised at all. I mean, first of all, television's like that. People get fired. There are all kinds of lines that no one will explain explicitly. I'm a very literal person, so I would totally happy if I'm knowledge that I would always say, just write it down for me. Yeah. Oh, I can't say, can you send me a text? I've got a bad memory.
Yeah. That's what I say too.
Oh, I can't. Exactly. I can't be conservative on a conservative TV channel. Just write that down for me, if you would, just so I can have it as a reference point. Oh, well, the lines. No, I really don't, because I'm kind of stupid. So if you could just, so I knew on a gut level, I knew. They were very nice to me. I should say that and be clear about it. They were very nice to me the entire time I was there, but I could feel that they strongly disagreed in the war in Ukraine stuff.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's what it was? I mean,
I don't know. I'm just speculating, but they really didn't like that at all. The January 6th stuff, they really didn't like.
That.
I think we had a bunch of people quit over that, and mostly I would say mediocre. Like Chris Wallace should not be on television, or Jonah Goldberg, or so. You know what I mean? These are people who obviously the audience hated and shouldn't have been there in the first place. But they were so outraged because I said, it seems like there are probably a lot of feds in the crowd
Oh,
on
yeah,
January
busloads.
6th. And now it turns out, of course, there were way more even than I imagined. The whole thing was a complete setup.
Yeah.
The whole thing was a lie, and it was used to put people in prison for expressing their constitutionally protected rights.
A 3-time Purple Heart winner.
Oh, I know.
So there he is. So it turns out he hasn't really ever been told exactly why he was fired, or at least if he was told, he's not really revealing it to us. He goes a little bit deeper into what may or may not have happened. He goes a little bit deeper into that when he was on the All In podcast. Check this out.
I don't know why I was fired. I mean, it kind of is an Agatha Christie story. There are like so many suspects. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I was never told. I can only speculate. There were a lot of different things going on. I had a lot of opinions that were unpopular, with people who might have influenced my show getting canceled. So I really don't know. I will say, right after it happened, people said, well, how can they fire the top guy? And because that's what it is. I'm certainly not the first high-rated host to get fired. It's not only about ratings. There are a lot of different factors. It's a big company. You all have worked for and run big companies, and there's a lot of complicated stuff going on, and it's never exactly clear, why things happen the way they do. But I was not shocked by it. I mean, I was shocked by it in a short-term sense. I didn't expect to have my show canceled that morning, but I was not shocked at all when I thought about it for a minute. I'd expected that. You can't kind of give the finger to everybody and persist in a corporate job. So hard feelings. I in fact, I said that on the call when I received the news. It's not my company, and I never felt like I had a right to be on the air. I was working at the pleasure of the family that runs the company, who treated me very well, and they wanted me off, and so I was off.
Did you ever have moments where somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, advertiser XYZ is getting uncomfortable, or we're trying to land this new advertiser and they want you to shape things in one way? Did you ever feel that pressure? Is that just a thing that is kind of like a boogeyman that doesn't actually exist?
Oh, it not only exists, it defines news coverage, especially on pharma. Because pharma is the biggest advertiser in television, as I know you know. And so for sure, I mean, if, Pfizer is sponsoring your show, you're not going to question the facts. I mean, it's kind of that simple. So absolutely. And of course, that's why they're the biggest advertiser, so they can shape news coverage. I mean, that's the point. But I personally never had a single person say to me, don't say this, that I recall. I haven't thought about it too much, but that certainly, I was there 14 years, and I didn't have that experience regularly or at all, really, that I can remember. And I think, my producers may have been told that, but it didn't ever get to me because I was always really clear, which is, I always said out loud to the supervisors there, I work for your company. I don't own this network. All I can control is what I say. If you don't like what I say, don't have me on TV.
Yeah, what's really interesting about this is I think that there is this idea that people in media are told what to say. And there are probably some instances of that, but I've been in media my whole career, from radio broadcasting to now this, to working on the Hill, and I've never been told what to say. When there was a lot of chatter there has been for a long time about this idea that people are told, that news people or that talkers are told what to say. And I have always pushed back on that and said, no, that's not how they control the narrative. The way they control the narrative is they just don't have you on. If they don't like what you're saying, they just don't hire you, or they fire you, or they find people who say the things already naturally that they once said. So these guys in suits running these media empires, they know how audiences work. They spend millions upon millions of dollars studying audiences, and they know that the one thing audiences love is genuine and authenticity from the person that they're listening to. They don't want somebody who's fake and just reading lines. Now, of course, that exists, and of course, there are people that just read lines, and then there's and that is coming from the higher ups, and they're kind of the teleprompter readers the entire time. But talkers who give their opinions, I have yet to see a talker being told what to say. What happens is they just get fired, and these big wigs know to hire people that just share the sentiments of what they want shared authentically. So if they want coverage that is pro-war in Ukraine, they just ensure that the people they put in front of audiences are genuinely pro the war in Ukraine. And that way the audience doesn't feel like, oh, I'm listening to somebody who, they're not genuine. They're just saying this for the money. Now, of course, these companies, they will let you know who their advertisers are. They do let you know where the advertisers may stand on certain issues. You might realize that that may mean that the advertiser doesn't want to advertise on your show. You might then modify or edit the things you say in order to cater to that particular advertiser. I mean, I'm sure that stuff happens. But I just found this particularly interesting because, from my experience, it's just that they hire people who they like the viewpoint that they're spewing, and they cater their coverage depending on the lean of the outlet to a certain audience, and they just ensure that the people they hire also share the sentiments of the audience. That's typically how it works. It's probably that way in written media, I would imagine. But, Tucker right there is saying, look, I gave the finger to everybody, and you can't really expect to stay in a corporate media job when you tell everybody, when you're calling everybody out and you're basically really against the mainstream narrative that's always been out there. So, good for him for sticking to his principles. And look, at the end of the day, the guy's not hurting. He's financially very well off, making millions of dollars. For some of us that ended up leaving our jobs or were fired from the jobs because of not being able to say what we wanted to say or being censored or edited in some way, many of us did not have, cushions of millions of dollars to fall back on. Tucker luckily does. Good for him. But it looks like we'll never really know the true reason why Tucker Carlson was fired from Fox News. It could have been entirely, had nothing to do with opinions at all. It could have very well been about loss of advertising dollars and just when they did the math, they figured, well, we make a lot of money off of him, but we also lose a lot of money off of him. We could put somebody in his slot that maybe makes less money for us, but we also pay less. And so when you actually do the math, we make more with this other person, even though that person's not as popular as Tucker Carlson. Sometimes it just can come down to a math equation like that. And unfortunately, we will not know, but good for Tucker Carlson for sticking to his principles, even in times, of course, I didn't agree with him on everything, but it's nice to have people who are honest, and it's nice to hear that he was honest and that they were good to him and they let him say what he wanted to say until they didn't. And that was my experience. That's the experience of many other people as well. And that's just the nature of the beast. And you just never know. In media, in this gig, you never know when you're suddenly cut off the air. The joke in radio was always, congratulations for getting hired, don't buy a house. Because you don't know how long you have this job for. Well, guys, the search for the perfect gift is over. I've got the most genius stocking stuffers for everyone on your list. CBD from cbdistillery.com. Stuff their stockings with CBD for better sleep, or give the runner on your list the gift of less pain after exercise. And wouldn't a calmer mind be perfect this holiday season for yourself? CB Distillery has you covered with their full range of carefully formulated CBD and plant-based solutions. CB Distillery's healing plant compounds are made with the highest quality, clean ingredients, no artificial colors, no artificial flavors or preservatives, and with over 2 million customers and a 100% money-back guarantee, CB Distillery is the source to trust. So this year, give the gift of a calmer mind, better sleep, and less pain after exercise. And with code KIM, you can stuff all of their stockings for 20% off. So visit cbdistillery.com and enter the code KIM for your discount. No prescription is required. That's cbdistillery.com, promo code KIM for 20% off, cbdistillery.com. Florida Democrats have canceled the Democratic primary in their state and have declared Joe Biden the winner because of democracy, they say. They say that's democracy. That's how it works. Here's what Washington Post had to say about it. It says, with presidential primaries looming, there's only one name on the official list of Democratic presidential candidates in Florida, President Biden, a move that angered the incumbent's long shot challengers who say they've been unfairly left out. The decision is the latest setback for Representative Dean Phillips, who's a Democrat from Minnesota running for president in the Democratic primary. Marianne Williamson is also running, and she's been running. And there's also Cenk Uygur from TYT, who is running as well. says that both of those two, they didn't list Cenk, trail Biden in public polling and fundraising. Under Florida rules, the state party votes on who will appear on primary ballots. Florida's Democratic primary said in a statement on Friday that the executive committee voted unanimously late last month to name Biden and only Biden to its list of candidates. If a presidential primary has a single candidate, then state election law says that the uncontested race will not appear on the state's primary ballot. So they're saying, well, there was only one person. This was an uncontested race. We don't care about the three of you who are running for president. I mean, what would they have done if RFK Jr. was still running as a Democrat? They still would have canceled this and said there are no real challengers. This is an uncontested race, even though he's polling higher than Joe Biden in certain aspects of the election, and yet they would have still canceled it. So this is a bull excuse. They just didn't want to shame or embarrass Joe Biden by having many of his votes be lost to Marianne Williamson, to Cenk, who's there would be an issue with Cenk on whether or not he could even take office because he was not born in the United States. That still needs to be up to the courts. And also to Dean Phillips, who's also running for president. But the Democratic Party said, no, we're Democratic. And so we're going to cancel, we're all about democracy, so we're going to cancel democracy. Dean Phillips said Americans would expect the absence of democracy in Tehran, not Tallahassee. Our mission as Democrats is to defeat authoritarians, not become them. Right. Michael T. Morley, who teaches election law at Florida State University College of Law, told the Washington Post that both political parties in the state have lined up behind incumbent presidents and canceled primaries in the absence of credible challengers. And he cited the re-election campaigns of Bill Clinton, George Bush, and Obama as examples of this process in action. Yeah, but were they incredibly unpopular? I mean, Joe Biden is incredibly unpopular. There's actual challengers to him. The people should deserve to have their say. And one thing that Cenk mentioned was that, if they could just arbitrarily give all the delegates of Florida to Joe Biden without an election, they could theoretically do that with anybody. And they, of course, could. So he says, well, why do I have any less of a claim to those votes than Joe Biden if we're not going to have a vote at all? And I think he's right on that. Here's the Democratic Party actually cheering. I want you guys to listen to this. This is when they announced to the world that they have just officially put Joe Biden on the ballot without an election, no election whatsoever in Florida. And they said, we just officially put President Joe Biden on the ballot in Florida 4 more years. And this is them cheering that on. 4 more years, 4 more years, 4 more years, 4 more years, 4 more years. Yeah, so they're super excited about that. Championing the fact that they didn't have any democracy at all in this state of Florida for Democrats. Marianne Williamson and Cenk Uygur did a joint press conference to push back on this, to say that this was a sham. And of course it is. I mean, Marianne Williamson has been running this whole time. Cenk is kind of new to the race. Dean Phillips also in the race. But Marianne's been running pretty much the entire time since there was, she announced quite early, quite a while ago. But here is a clip of Marianne explaining this whole, just kind of talking about what has happened here. Watch this.
The Constitution confers no special assignation to incumbency. This is just a narrative that was created by them, this idea that you don't challenge an incumbent. And that includes, by the way, Teddy Kennedy challenging Jimmy Carter. It's really important for us to remember, Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter, not Teddy Kennedy. So we have all of these memes that are out there that are being used to create the impression that Dean and Cenk and I are doing something wrong. We are not doing something wrong. We are running for office. That's not wrong in the United States of America.
Well, it's not supposed to be, but apparently you're not allowed to do it anymore, according to the Democratic Party, because democracy. Well, the Democratic Party has pushed back and they said, you guys are overreacting. This is not a conspiracy theory. There's nothing to see here. This is from the Miami Herald. They're saying no conspiracy. Florida Democrats explain cancellation of state presidential primary. In this, they say the Democratic Party says the decision was made weeks ago and its hands are tied. They can't change it. The deadline for the party to submit its candidate list to the Florida Secretary of State's office was November 30th. Under the state law, if a political party lists only one presidential candidate, that person will be declared the automatic winner of the primary and no vote will be held. The party chose its roster of candidates at a meeting of its state's executive committee in October, a decision that went under the radar. Eden Giagnoro, the Florida Democratic Party's communications director, said that Biden was the only candidate nominated for the ballot and was consequently the only one whose name was submitted to the Secretary of State's office. They went on to say then reiterated that the party was just simply following the rules and said, I think what would be anti-democratic would be us bending the rules for latecomers. Yeah, latecomers. Marianne Williamson has been running this entire time. She's been running for as long as Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was running. Sure, maybe Cenk is a latecomer, maybe Phillips is a latecomer, but Marianne's been there the whole time. There absolutely should have at least been a primary with Joe Biden's name and Marianne Williamson's name on the ballot and let voters decide if they want to vote for Marianne Williamson. And the thing that would have been embarrassing for Joe Biden is if there was a good chunk of people who chose her over him. And that is something that they don't want to have happen. They're looking to minimize or really what they're looking to do. I mean, look, this just kind of plays right on into what I've been saying this whole time, which is they're going to be swapping Joe Biden out. I think their goal was to swap him out with Gavin Newsom. And I think that's why we saw the debate between Gavin Newsom and Ron DeSantis, this kind of odd debate, because neither of them are likely to be the nominee for the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. But there was this odd, weird debate between the two governors anyway, like as if, well, this is what we wanted. The establishment saying this is what we wanted to have happen. We wanted these two guys to face each other, not Donald Trump and Joe Biden again. But I do think that the Democratic Party they were planning on swapping out Joe Biden for Gavin Newsom. The problem is Gavin Newsom performed so poorly in that debate, and many more people liked Ron DeSantis in that debate that, it's kind of a question on how strong Gavin Newsom or any Democrat. I mean, I can't think of a single Democrat who would do well against Donald Trump in a general election or even or against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. But nonetheless, what I've been saying this whole time is that they're going to get to the convention. They're going to then say, well, Joe Biden's not running for president after all, or maybe they'll allow the convention to happen, but most likely not. Most likely they'll do this during the convention. And they'll say, so we don't know what to do. We want Gavin Newsom. Joe Biden's going to step down. He said he was only going to run one. He was only going to serve one term, that he's just too old. So he's going to step aside. He's going to let a younger generation lead America. Isn't he great that he's going to do that? Oh, shoot, we don't have anybody else. We didn't have a primary, so there's nobody else that, was the runner-up. There was no close call. So here's Gavin Newsom. Now all the delegates vote for Gavin Newsom. And that would be it. That would be the Democratic Party primary process, and them just kind of swapping Joe Biden out for somebody else. And that's how they would get away with it, because they wouldn't, especially if they're not going to hold primaries. If they're not going to hold primaries and there's no one else who would have claim to the delegates because there was no primary, they're more likely to do this. So this is the first sign that they are planning on swapping Joe Biden out at the conference, at the DNC convention, because theoretically, if they were to have the primary in Florida, and let's say, Marianne Williamson gets second place to Joe Biden, and maybe she gets 10% of the vote or 4% or even 1% of the vote, she could still theoretically, if Joe Biden steps aside at the convention, she could then have claim to those delegates and say, well, I was the runner-up. And if he's going to toss his delegates away, then you have to give them to me, right? She would have that claim. Well, not if they don't have a primary process. And they could say, well, Joe Biden was the only name on the ticket. So if he gives up his delegates, then what do? Well, we could give those delegates to anybody we want. That's the plan, guys. That is what they're planning on doing. The question now is, are they going to replace him with Gavin Newsom? I'm still willing to bet that's who they're still hoping for that. I think they were hoping that he was going to somehow defeat Ron DeSantis in a debate. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea at all, to put him up there like that. He's been going around, went to China, met with Xi Jinping. So he's kind of doing all of these quasi-presidential things, getting these photo ops in, standing on a debate stage doing debate. And that way they could say, well, Gavin Newsom's already been kind of, the public's aware of him. He's been debating Republicans. He's been visiting foreign leaders. So he's the natural shoo-in for the replacement for Joe Biden. I'm telling you, this is what they're going to do. I don't see Gavin Newsom being successful in this. I don't see Americans latching on to Gavin Newsom, just like they hoped Kamala Harris when they put her into vice presidency, thinking Americans will grow to love her. Nobody grew to love her. It didn't work. So they're trying to get us to grow to love Gavin Newsom, or thinking that we'll rally around him. And there will be Democrats who rally around him because they would rally around anybody who's got the D next to their name. But I don't know. It's interesting, but this is just another one of those examples. This is one of those clues of what they're planning on doing in order to thwart democracy at the time of the convention and just put in the person they want without the voters' input at all. That is the Democratic Party now. I'm sure Republicans are looking with envy, wishing they could do the same thing. They actually do adhere to democracy, to democratic standards, and they do have elections. That's why they ended up with Donald Trump the first time, and we'll end up with Donald Trump again. I'm sure there's many in the GOP establishment who wish that they could do what the Democrats are going to do and have super delegates and cancel primaries and just put in the person that they want rather than the person they're going to get, which is for sure Donald Trump is going to be the nominee on the GOP side. So, but just, we're just going to keep looking for these clues that Democrats are going to continue to evade democracy and claim that they're the ones who are fighting for democracy and protecting democracy. In the meantime, they're the authoritarians out there. Go figure. Well, 5 GOP senators are calling for a travel ban with China over a mysterious respiratory illness that is apparently overwhelming China's hospitals. Marco Rubio, J.D. Vance, Rick Scott, Tommy Tuberville, and Mike Braun wrote in this letter. They wrote, in light of an unknown respiratory illness spreading throughout the People's Republic of China, we call on you to immediately restrict travel between the United States and the PRC. As you know, the Chinese Communist Party has a long history of lying about public health crises. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the CCP's obfuscation of the truth, I haven't drinking enough coffee today, and lack of transparency robbed the United States of vital knowledge about the disease and its origin. So you've got 5 senators writing the White House saying that they want to restrict travel with China because they think that there's this virus spreading throughout China. And the last time the WHO was working hand in hand with China, covering it up, they say, and that's how we ended up with COVID-19. So what are they freaking out about? Well, here's this tweet by Chuck Calesto. Look at this tweet. He says, world on high alert after mystery outbreak in China rapidly spreads. 8 countries now hit, multiple others on high alert. Senators call on Biden to prohibit travel from China amid concerns over unknown pneumonia outbreak. Just in time for election season is when this is happening, he says. Medical professionals in certain areas of Massachusetts and Ohio have noted a significant rise in pneumonia cases among children, echoing similar outbreaks in China and various European countries. Warren County, located about 30 miles from Cincinnati, has experienced 142 cases of a condition known as white lung syndrome, so they have a name for it, in children since August. Local health officials have characterized this number as exceptionally high. So they're worried about this thing called white lung syndrome. And it's now 8 countries have been hit. It's spreading all around. We've got it even here in the United States. So here's actually some reporting from Newsweek that I want to show you. Doctor describes China's overwhelmed hospitals verge of collapse. Says amid a recent surge in respiratory illnesses in northern China, one doctor has estimated the hospital where she works received 2 to 3 times as many daily patients as in the COVID-19 pandemic. One doctor would have to handle as many as 180 patients during a single night shift because so many patients are arriving in the evening and after midnight, recounted Han Togan, who leads Peking University's 3rd hospital pediatric unit. according to a Wednesday report by the state outlet China Daily. Since mid-October, clusters of respiratory infections, mostly among children, have spiked, overwhelming capacity in many hospitals across northern China. So they're saying this overwhelming of hospitals, all these kids are coming, and it's kids this time, it's the kids. I'm going to explain to you what's going on here. They're hyping this up. It's like, oh, it's another pandemic. The World Health Organization has said data provided by China indicated the illnesses were mostly by influenza, mycoplasma pneumonia, rhinovirus infections, RSV, and adenovirus. So this is what the WHO is saying. Now, those 5 senators are saying, yeah, but we don't really trust them. So they're just saying, oh, it's just normal respiratory illnesses, and kids are just getting these respiratory illnesses. And yes, they're getting them at a higher rate, but these are just normal illnesses. These are not novel, new, like COVID-19 was. This is just the same old, it's just happening in higher numbers. So they're saying that compared to the level seen in 2017 and 2018 before COVID-19 pandemic hit, the daily number has doubled, even tripled in some areas of China. So the kids are just getting extra sick. But it's not anything new. But then you've got people here in the United States who are saying, yeah, right, we don't believe them. We don't believe China. We don't believe the WHO. Maybe rightfully so on that. But what is the agenda here? I mean, are we really trying to get ourselves into another pandemic 4 years later? Goes on to say in this Newsweek article that the higher volume stretched hospitals thin, sending them scrambling to boost their staff and redistribute resources. Some institutions reportedly had to shutter their outpatient departments, directing all attention to emergency care. Dr. Han noted that in her over 20 years of medical practice, she had never witnessed 2 emergency doctors working night shifts concurrently. So notably, the Health Commission outlined that children ages 1 to 4 are predominantly infected with the flu and rhinovirus, while those aged 5 to 14 are more affected by the flu, mycoplasma pneumonia, known as walking pneumonia, and adenovirus. So they're saying, look, it's just normal viruses that these kids are getting. And now what has been alarming is that people are claiming that this has spread to the United States, like as if we've never had any of these illnesses here in the United States. Look at this article here. White lung pneumonia spreads to 2 U.S. states. So the white lung syndrome. Health officials in 2 U.S. states have reported a rise in cases of child pneumonia, similar to the outbreak that has swept China and parts of Europe. Doctors in Warren County, Ohio, on the outskirts of Cincinnati, have identified more than 140 cases of the condition known as white lung syndrome, which has overwhelmed hospitals in China in recent weeks. Officials in Massachusetts have also reported soaring cases of walking pneumonia, a milder form of the condition. The localized outbreaks have raised fears that the disease could sweep the northern hemisphere this winter. Several European countries are tackling an increase in white lung cases, putting hospitals and medical services under strain. None of the outbreaks appear to have been caused by a novel pathogen, however, and not all cases are caused by the same infection. Experts believe that a combination of seasonal bacterial and viral bugs have hit at the same time. In China in particular, this may be due to infection rates rebounding after lockdown, or it could be something else. What did all the Chinese kids get that many American kids got, but all the Chinese kids got, that some of the American kids got, and now they clearly have a weakened immune system, and they're catching all these diseases. Here's the thing, though. What the problem with all of this reporting is they're calling it this white lung syndrome. They've given this a name. And yet they then tell you, after they're scaremongering all these parents with your kid is going to end up with this white lung syndrome, and it's overwhelming Chinese hospitals, and these senators writing this letter to the White House saying, oh, we got to shut down travel with China because, oh no, pneumonia might come to the United States. Pneumonia that these experts are saying is being caused by all these other illnesses that these kids are catching. So it's not one disease, one virus that's spreading around and then causing this white lung syndrome. It's these kids are just getting sick with a bunch of stuff, and it's ending up giving them pneumonia rather than them just clearing the infection, whatever the infection is, clearing the illness. They instead are ending up with pneumonia. They have, obviously, the pandemic that is now going around is weakened immune systems for kids. Clearly, weakened immune systems for kids. If these are just flu and RSV and adenoviruses and rhinoviruses or whatever. I mean, look, like a combination of all these variety of viruses, and kids are getting walking pneumonia at higher rates, at double to triple the rates in China. And then we're seeing some areas of this country, and if you look at the areas, Massachusetts had high rates of, there's some things that people were given that ended up, possibly weakening their immune system, or things that were done that possibly weakened the immune system. We had a pandemic, people were locked away from each other, not catching each other's germs and not spreading various viruses around that many are asymptomatic, but they just help build your immune system. So there was a big lockdown. You see that the big lockdowns in China, big lockdowns here in the United States, especially in certain areas of the country, more so than others. So kids were locked away. On top of that, there have been, some recommendations to these kids of them doing certain things. I'm kind of giving you guys the clues here that very well may have done what many doctors were worried about and said this may kill an immune system, that we're seeing high rates of infection amongst people who, are taking something over and over and over again. And it seems that when they take this thing over and over and over again, they end up with higher rates of catching, according to studies from the Cleveland Clinic, higher rates of infections. And so there's something killing their immune system. So that is clearly, and in China, everybody was mandated, everybody was compliant. And now we're seeing what the result is of that. But rather than all of the media and all of these people just admitting that the policies during the COVID-19 pandemic were disastrous and that we're still learning just how disastrous those policies were, rather than focus on that and say, this is what happens when you kill people's immune systems, maybe we should never do that again. They're saying, oh no, it's white lung syndrome and it's spreading and we have to lock down. We can't let this spread outside of China. It's going to happen again. And now we've got this. Now, of course, those senators, they would be the ones, because there are a bunch of GOP senators, they would be the first ones to say, wow, the pandemic, the policies that liberal Democrats put in place during the pandemic failed, screwed all these kids over. Not a good idea. They, of course, don't want to say that because they're looking to, warmonger with China. So anytime they can point the finger at China, blame China, warmonger, ruffle feathers, they're going to take that opportunity. And that's what they're doing here. But it doesn't look like there's really, truly anything to worry about unless you've been sheltering your children to the point where they have not had a chance to build up their immune systems. And it makes sense that it would be kids that are more affected by this than any other group, because kids haven't lived 30, 40, 50, 60 years to build up an immune system before they were sheltered and had other things done to them that would wreck their immune system. They're young, they're fragile, they haven't been able to build it up yet. And so it's much easier to wreck. It's much more fragile. And so they're the ones who are now getting this white lung syndrome, AKA pneumonia, from just having regular illnesses and their bodies not being able to fight it off effectively because it doesn't look like their immune systems are very strong. And that is a big problem. But that is what's going on with this. I know there's a lot of talk in this in the news and a lot of fear mongering. We're seeing stuff on social media. We're seeing stuff all around news sites talking about, this white lung pneumonia, this mysterious thing is spreading and it's overwhelming China, and it's here now. It's here for us, like as if we're going to be marching into another pandemic. We're not. This was just another side effect of really piss poor policies, in my opinion, from looking at this and clearly from these kids just catching everything they could possibly catch now. Well, the recent spike in respiratory illnesses in China makes it clear the importance of being prepared for medical emergencies. Authorities are saying the increase in respiratory illnesses are probably not new, but from known illnesses like the flu, mycoplasma pneumonia, which is walking pneumonia, RSV, and COVID, which is why it's crucial to have emergency supplies on hand. Introducing the Wellness Company's Medical Emergency Kit. Are you prepared for the next unexpected crisis? This was founded by doctors like Dr. Peter McCullough. The Wellness Company is committed to building a parallel healthcare system and empowering you to take control of your health In a time when over 40% of Americans say they would avoid a doctor or a hospital unless it was a catastrophic situation, the wellness company's medical emergency kit provides a solution. The kit includes 8 potentially life-saving medications for you to keep on hand in times of need, along with a guidebook detailing how, when, and the dosing for each medication. The medical emergency kit from the wellness company includes emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics to help keep you and your family safe in the face of natural disasters or supply chain shortages or medical emergencies. So be prepared for the unexpected. Go to twc.health/Kim and use code Kim to save 15% off at checkout. That's twc.health/Kim, code Kim for 15% off. Don't wait until it's too late. Take control of your health with the wellness company's medical emergency kit. Well, money for Ukraine is about to run out without Congress passing an aid package. And so there's all of these arguments coming out to keep the funds going. Listen to this one, that we should keep the war going because 90% of the money goes to Americans. Watch this.
It's one of the best kept secrets in Washington is that 90% of the military aid that we give to Ukraine doesn't go to Ukraine. It stays here in the United States to produce weapons for Ukraine or to replace weapons that we've sent to Ukraine from our stockpiles, and now we're building more modern versions for our military. We tracked 117 production lines in 31 states and 71 cities that are producing. That's creating jobs for America, but it's also enhancing our national security. A perfect example: we had not built a single Stinger missile in the United States since 2005, almost 2 decades. Why is that? Because we were fighting terrorists who didn't have jet planes. Well, China has jet fighters. And now, because of Ukraine aid, we're spending $465 million to build Stinger missiles again. And this is happening across the spectrum on all sorts of weapons systems. We're giving them old equipment that's been sitting in our stockpiles for decades, building new modern stuff that's helping our national security, creating hot production lines for weapons that we'll need in case of Taiwan, for China, and also to help Israel.
So isn't that nice? So all this money really is just going to support American industries, but not just any American industry, the American war industry. So we're keeping all of the war, those who build war, weapons of war manufacturers, we're keeping them rich, filthy rich, it sounds like, and busy. Meanwhile, so he's saying 90% of the money doesn't even reach Ukraine. 90% of that is spent here in the United States for weapons that then get manufactured, or old weapons get sent to Ukraine, and then the U.S. gives that money to the manufacturers, and then they manufacture shiny new weapons for the United States. Shiny new weapons, because that's what we need. Because here we are in a country where the infrastructure is failing. We've got homelessness everywhere. We've got rampant poverty. People are stressed out, and they decide that the place to put the money is weapons. I mean, think about that for a second. If that's true, that the money is 90% staying on America's shores, then all it's doing is just making weapons manufacturers filthy rich, while every other industry in the United States suffers. All the things that we need in this country in order to be a nice country that people want to emulate and mimic. Why would anybody want to mimic or emulate us when we just spend all of our money on weapons? That's the only thing we have that's nice, shiny, and new are weapons. Meanwhile, you go to China and you see some of their cities, and they make United States cities look like a third world country. So, but this is where the money's going. It's going to the United States. And that's why we have to keep the war going, he says. We got to keep it going, because what it's doing is it's making the war industry wealthy. That money is at least coming back to America. So that's why we got to keep it going. Wow. This is why there's lobbyists, right? This is what the lobbyists do. They say, well, but this is for American jobs and American prosperity, but only for a few. It's not actually going around everywhere. And maybe this is also why they prevented peace negotiations, right? We've been prolonging this war, and it's probably because the warmonger lobby decided that they have money to make, billions upon billions of dollars to make. If 90% of all those billions that were earmarked for Ukraine actually ended up on America's shores, that's billions upon billions of dollars. There is no push to end the war from these bankers and these military weapons manufacturers when they're making billions of dollars. Branko Marchektic reports for Responsible Statecraft the numerous attempts at peace between Russia and Ukraine, and NATO whisking in, to prevent it. He writes, The latest piece of corroboration, comes courtesy of David Arakhamia, the parliamentary leader of Zelensky's Servant of the People Party, who led the Ukrainian delegation in peace talks with Moscow. Arakhamia told journalist Natalia Muzichuk in a recent televised interview that Russia's goal was to push us to take neutrality, meaning to commit to not just joining NATO, and that they were ready to end the war if we accept neutrality. So that's what the Ukrainians are saying, is that Russia just wanted us to accept neutrality. That's what they wanted. They said there were several reasons the negotiations ultimately collapsed, he said, including the need to change the Ukrainian constitution, which had been amended in February of 2019 to enshrine the country's NATO aspirations. They actually put NATO in their constitution. I wonder who talked them into that, where Ukraine is going to be in NATO. It's part of the constitution. They had to go back. They were saying, well, we'd have to go and amend the constitution. And the fact that Boris Johnson had come to Kiev to inform Ukrainian officials the West wouldn't sign any agreement with Moscow, instead urging, let's just fight. So they wanted to fight instead of actually go to peace, and yet here we are. The interview corroborates claims first reported in May of 2022 by the broadly Western-aligned Ukrainska Pravda outlet, which reported that Boris Johnson told Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky the West wouldn't support any peace deal, regardless of what Ukraine wanted, and they preferred to keep taking the fight to Russian President Vladimir Putin, who was less powerful than they had thought. All of it lends further weight to multiple accounts over the course of the past 21 months that have claimed Ukraine and Russia were on the brink of peace, but were blocked by NATO states eager for a prolonged war that would weaken Russia and possibly destabilize it. That was the goal. That was the goal, says former U.S. National Security official Fiona Hill. Reported the two sides had reached a tentative peace deal the same month of Johnson's surprise visit to Kiev, while former German Chancellor Schroeder, former Israeli Prime Minister Bennett, and several Turkish officials, all of whom were involved at various times in the talks, have said that NATO officials stopped or undermined the negotiations. Multiple U.S. reports document a divide in NATO, with the United States and UK reportedly heading a faction of states who preferred a longer war than a sooner peace. Historian Niall Ferguson reported overhearing an unnamed U.S. official say in March of 2022 that the only end game now is the end of Putin regime. That's the only end game. And it's really bad now. They're losing the war, and NATO head Stoltenberg even just recently said in an interview that NATO should prepare for bad news. He's saying it's not looking good. He says, we should maybe stick with them through thick and thin. Right now it's real thin. They're not doing really great, and we should maybe stick by them as they continue to lose this war. But, this is just, it's terrible what is happening to Ukraine. And Congress has a choice to make right now. They can let the money expire. And some people are saying, well, if you let the money expire, you're just going to commit Ukraine to, they're going to have to negotiate with Russia. This is not what we wanted. This isn't what we were talking them into when we were telling them to keep fighting, keep fighting. But on the flip side, if you give them all the money, what are you doing? You're telling Ukraine to send the last little bit of men of fighting age that they've got left to go out and die, basically wiping out an entire generation of Ukrainian men, leaving Ukraine in shambles. Either way, this is a losing war right now, but you've still got the White House begging for more money. Here's Jake Sullivan warning that the money for Ukraine is about to run out. Watch this.
Director Shalonda Young sent a letter to congressional leaders, which Karine was just referencing, explaining that without congressional action, the administration will run out of resources by the end of the year to procure more weapons and equipment for Ukraine and to provide equipment from U.S. military stocks without impacting our own military readiness. The resources Congress has provided for Ukraine and other national security needs have halted Russia's advances in Ukraine, helped Ukraine achieve significant military victories, including taking back more than 50% of the territory that Russia had previously occupied, and by revitalizing our own defense industrial base, jumpstarting and expanding production lines, and supporting good-paying jobs across the country. Now it's up to Congress. Congress has to decide whether to continue to support the fight for freedom in Ukraine as part of the 50-nation coalition that President Biden has built, or whether Congress will ignore the lessons we've learned from history and let Putin prevail. It is that simple. It is that stark a choice. And we hope that Congress, on a bipartisan basis, will make the right choice. There is no magical pot of funding available to meet this moment. As Director Young said, we're running out of money and we are nearly out of time. Congress has to act now to take up the president's supplemental request, which advances our own national security and helps a democratic partner in Ukraine fight against Russian aggression.
I mean, what would really happen to Ukraine when they say, okay, we're fighting for Ukrainian freedom? This is for Ukrainian freedom. What he means is Ukraine having a government that is corrupt. We know it's a very corrupt government, but that it's at least in bed with the United States versus a Ukrainian corrupt government that's in bed with Russia. What difference does it make for the actual Ukrainian at the end of the day? So if Ukrainian has a corrupt government run by the West or a corrupt government run by Russia, what difference does that make to the average person in Ukraine? It doesn't make much of a difference. Before all of this, before the 2014 Euromaidan, before the ousting of the elected president there, what has changed in Ukraine for the average person? Would that Ukrainian say, oh yeah, in 2013 we were super oppressed, we were under a government that was friendly with Russia, and we weren't voting, even though they voted for that guy? I mean, would they say that? Would they say, well, we weren't, but we didn't have any democracy, we didn't vote, or we were totally oppressed by Russia? And they wouldn't say any of this because none of that would be true. They voted just like they vote now. Their lives were no different then than they are now, except now they're at war. They've got an entire generation of men missing because they're dead. And I mean, and the map of the country is going to shrink. I mean, there's to say that, well, this is all for Ukrainian freedom. I mean, what is the argument there? Like, what did these people gain? Now, what did they gain after 2014 that they didn't have previously? No one's explained that to us. They've just spewed out the words Ukrainian freedom, and they expect when you hear the word freedom, you're going to support it blindly. And so they want members of Congress to sign over more money for Ukraine in order to continue this war. And you've got, interestingly, even warmongers themselves like Lindsey Graham actually saying, I don't think so, I'm going to put America first. You know that when Lindsey Graham is saying, I don't know about all that money for Ukraine, it's not very likely Ukraine's going to get it. Watch this.
So I will not vote for any aid until we secure our own border. Reform asylum, reform parole is possible to do. Democrats don't want to do it. All Republicans want to do it. I'm not helping Ukraine until we help ourselves.
Wow, okay. So we'll see what happens there. So basically what Republicans are doing is they're saying to Democrats, look, you want funding for Ukraine, fine, but we want a bunch of funding for some of our projects that we, our pet projects. And until you give us that funding, we're not giving you any more funding for Ukraine. So we'll see how this plays out in the next 3 weeks, because apparently that's all they've got until the money runs out for Ukraine. The problem is that this is not really politically popular for anybody on the Republican side to hand over more money to Ukraine when it's clearly a losing war. And we're just on the wrong side of a losing war on this one. And it's just money going out the door, and they'd rather give that money someplace else, like to Israel. So, we'll see what these guys end up doing in the next 3 weeks. All right. A newly leaked document reveals the new plan by Netanyahu and his regime to thin out the Gazans to the lowest possible number. Here's the report from Middle East Monitor that I want to read to you here. Israel's Israel Hayom newspaper revealed on Friday that the Israeli Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, is preparing a plan requested by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu aimed at reducing the number of Palestinian citizens in the Gaza Strip to the minimum possible following the aggression, the Israeli army on the Strip. Now, Ron Dermer, who is the Israel Minister of Strategic Affairs, is an American who made his aliyah to Israel, and he was born and raised in Miami Beach, went to Wharton School of Business, then ran off to Israel, and now he's now their Minister of Strategic Affairs. And he's apparently been putting together this plan to thin out the Gazans from the Gazan Strip. Well, we're going to find out what that means exactly. What do you mean by thin out the Gazans as they've restarted their bombing campaign, and now we're up to over 15,000 Gazans have been killed, and just in the last, since they've started bombing again, close to 1,000 have been killed. Goes on to say in the Middle East Monitor, the newspaper pointed out that despite the international community's position and the military's establishment in Tel Aviv on the plan, Netanyahu sees its implementation as a strategic goal for his government. So yeah, Netanyahu is an ideologue, and his big agenda has always been to make all the land Israel. So he gloated about dismantling the Oslo Accords. He does not want to see a two-state solution. He's held firm that the only Palestinian state, he's been saying this since he's a young man, the only Palestinian state that should exist is the state of Jordan, and that is it. And the rest of the land that is there is the land of Israel. That is his ideological goals. And now he's got an opportunity before he's going to be ousted from the government forever to try to accomplish this. And that's why he's so dangerous, because he's so radical. Goes on to say, it added that Netanyahu seeks to implement the plan without having to face a confrontation with the U.S., the international community, and Egypt, which categorically opposes it, pointing out that those close to Netanyahu clarified that the plan does not express an intention to expel the Palestinians, but an attempt to reduce the population density in the Gaza Strip. So somebody explain that to me. So if you're not going to thin out the numbers and reduce the numbers of the population of Gaza to the minimum, if you're not going to expel them in order to get to that, how else do you do that? The newspaper reported that Israel could bypass the Egyptian opposition to implement the plan by enabling Gazans to leave the Strip by sea and head to Europe and Africa. So clearly they're thinning it out by bombing the bombing campaign. They're certainly thinning out the place, but they also intend on putting these Palestinians on boats. They're saying, all right, fine. If Egypt won't let you in their border, we're just going to put you on boats. We're going to ship you out to the sea. We're just going to send you to the sea and let the boat take you where the boat takes you. So they're saying, we're not going to stop your boats. We're not going to intervene or interfere. We're just going to put you on a boat and have you sail away. And maybe you'll sail away to Europe. Maybe you'll sail away to Africa, but then you'll become their problem. So he's basically saying that one of the plans to thin out the Gazans is to put them on boats and to make them refugees and ship them off to Europe. Do you think Europe's going to take well to this? I mean, they're seeing all these protests in Europe. They're like, well, they clearly like the Palestinians. They're against us. So I guess they can have the Palestinians if that's what they're going to do. So they're going to expel them and looks like massacre them and put them in the sea and just say, we hope you survive. We hope you make it. A lot of refugees by boat do not make it. So the head of the Yisrael Beinu Party. Sorry, I'm slaughtering all of these words, all these names today. Avigdor Lieberman called for the U.S. to pressure Egypt to take control of the Gaza Strip after the aggression in Gaza, as well as forcing Jordan to control Area A, which is in the West Bank, which includes the largest Palestinian population in the West Bank. So let's go over this one. The idea from Avigdor Lieberman. So he's wanting Egypt to take control over the Gaza Strip and basically annex the Gaza Strip and have the Gazans be their problem, rather than a problem for the Israelis having to take care of them and help them rebuild after demolishing them. And he also wants Jordan to take control of Area A in the West Bank. So Area A it's like reservations. It's equivalent to Indian reservations in the United States. It's not a cohesive piece of land. It's just little towns and villages and cities throughout the West Bank. And it's separated by areas B and C, which apparently Israel wants to keep that land, and they just want Jordan to come in and implement governmental controls over the populated little portions like Swiss cheese of the West Bank. What's interesting about this plan is that this was already done, and then Israel went and actually took that land back. So there was a period of time before the 1967 war when the West Bank was annexed by Jordan, and the Gazans were annexed by Egypt. And during that time, the Palestinians in the West Bank were given Jordanian passports, and they were given Jordanian rights, and they had They were, they were treated well, and they were under Jordanian control. Same thing for the Gazans when it was under Egyptian control. Then the Israelis started a war in 1967. They did what they say, oh no, we didn't start the war. We did preemptive strikes. That's not us starting a war. Like how they frame everything in a way to where you're gaslit into thinking something that happened didn't happen. So they're saying, no, we didn't start it. We didn't fire first. We did preemptive striking. They were going to fire on us first, and we just preempted their first strike. I mean, it's just a bunch of crap. So they started a war in 1967. They fired at Egypt. It caused a larger aggression. That war spread. Jordan got involved. Syria got involved. These other countries got involved. And in the end, Israel took back. They took Gaza. They took the West Bank. And they also took the rest of the Sinai Peninsula from Egypt. So they annexed a ton of land. And meanwhile, when they annexed this land, they did not give the rights to these Palestinian people. They didn't give them full Israeli rights. If you're going to take the land, the thing to do from that point on is to actually give those people rights. We did that here in the United States when after the war with Mexico, when the United States won California and New Mexico and all these areas, the U.S. then did agreements with the people, who were Mexican nationals, who then suddenly found themselves living on American soil because the U.S. took that land, annexed that land, and actually paid Mexico for that land. And they were given U.S. citizenship, and their land rights were enshrined in the treaty. So their land was protected, and they were given U.S. citizenship. That is not something that has ever been given to the Palestinians by Israel. They take the land, and then they just subjugate the people rather than and oppress them, keep them under military occupation rather than giving them true rights and true courts and real rules and real laws. They instead have kept them under military occupation. What's interesting is that Avigdor Lieberman is actually proposing going back to this kind of, except for the Swiss cheese part of the West Bank. They wouldn't give all of the West Bank to Jordan to control, just only parts of it. Really just trying to alleviate themselves of the burden of the Palestinian people of having to care for them, the human rights of them, and to give them citizenship as you would normally do when you annex land. That at some point you give these people citizenship, you give them all the rights of the people on your land. Native Americans in the United States are Americans. If they want to live on the reservations, they can choose to do that. Otherwise, they're allowed to leave those reservations and live within U.S. population, and they're given all the same exact rights as any other American. Even Puerto Ricans, when they come and live in America on the mainland, they're given rights. They're given all the same rights as U.S. citizens, even though they're a territory of the United States. But Israel is not following that path, and instead, they have just been oppressing the Palestinian people. In a post on X, Lieberman, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Security, and Finance, considered that Egypt's control over the Gaza Strip and Jordan's control over the populated areas in the West Bank is an alternative to the two-state solution, which he says is unrealistic. So instead, he just wants, okay, you guys can have that land back, kind of, when it comes to the West Bank. Not all the West Bank, even though that's probably a better solution, and that's probably what they should do, is give all of the West Bank to Jordan and give all of the Gaza Strip to Egypt. That is not going to be popular with the Palestinian people. But at this point, what we do know is that Israel cannot be in control of these people. That Israel has shown that it is trying to annihilate these people, wanting to shove them off into the sea, wanting to shove them through Egypt, wanting to gain this land. They don't have any interest in human rights of these people, of treating these people like human beings. Instead, they treat them like human shields that they can just blow up. And, so now there is this plan to somehow get rid of the Gazans, and that is Netanyahu's end goal here. According to Reuters, now we're seeing this actually happening and how they're thinning this out, because according to Reuters, intense Israeli airstrikes hit the south of the Gaza Strip on Monday. Now remember, everybody was told to go south, killing and wounding dozens of Palestinians, including in areas where Israel had told people to seek shelter. So Israel says, go south, go south. Here we are, we're being so humanitarian. No military in the world is as humane and moral as us. We actually try to tell the civilians to get out of the war zone, and we tell them where to go. And then they tell them where to go. They herd them to the south. And what do they do now? They say, oh, you're in the wrong part of the south. We need to move you somewhere else. So you went where I told you to go, and now I need you to go again. Because what they're doing, and what I've said since the beginning of this conflict, is they're herding them, they're pushing them, they're pushing them. They're going to start at the north, and they're going to move their way through the Gaza Strip until they push everybody to that Rafah border crossing. And then they could say to Egypt, where else can these people go? Into the sea or into Egypt? Take your pick. Do you really want 2 million lives on 2 million lives on your hands, like the blood of these 2 million? Do you really want them on your hands, Egypt? Meanwhile, it's actually Israel doing it. Here's the Reuters article saying intense Israeli airstrikes hit the south of the Gaza Strip on Monday, killing and wounding dozens of Palestinians, including in areas where Israel had told people to seek shelter, residents and journalists on the ground said. Israeli troops and tanks also pressed their ground campaign against Hamas militants in the south of the enclave after having largely gained control of the now devastated north. So at the United Nations, Secretary General Antonio Guterres appealed to Israel to avoid further action that would make the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza worse and to spare civilians from more suffering. Quote, for people ordered to evacuate, there is nowhere safe to go and very little to survive on, a UN spokesperson, Stephanie Dujarric, said. Israel's closest ally, the United States, has repeatedly urged it to do more to protect civilians and said the Israeli offensive in the south should not repeat the massive civilian toll it has had in the north. They're clearly not listening to that, because they've already killed over close to 1,000 people since they've started their bombing campaign again. It says about 900 people have been killed in Israel's airstrikes since the truce ended on Friday. So 1,000 people over the weekend. Gaza Health Minute, according to the Gaza Health authorities. On Monday, top U.S. officials said it was too early to make a definitive assessment on whether Israel was following U.S. advice to take concrete steps to ensure protections for civilians, although a State Department spokesperson called some aspects of the offensive in southern Gaza an improvement. So they're saying, well, it's too early to make a definitive assessment on whether or not they're actually trying to spare civilian lives. Meanwhile, nearly 1,000 are dead since over the weekend. It doesn't seem like, I mean, how much more information do you need? Early on Monday, Israel ordered Palestinians to leave parts of Gaza's main southern city, Khan Yunis, but residents said that the areas which they had been told to go to were also coming under fire. Israel's military posted a map on social media platform X with around a quarter of Khan Yunis marked off in yellow as territory that must be evacuated at once. 3 arrows. Now listen to this. So they're telling everybody that's in the south, get out. You have to move. And then they show 3 arrows, and guess where the arrows point? And they're like, go that way, go that way. They go south and they go west, telling people to head towards the Mediterranean and towards Rafah. So go towards the sea and go towards Egypt, Israel says. That's where you're safest, right? Because they are hurting them. And now, according to the plan, the leaked document that leaked to this Israeli newspaper outlet of Netanyahu's plan is to put them in the sea, is to literally say they either go into Egypt, if you let them, open the crossing, let these people in, or we're going to put them on boats and we're sending them to the sea. So, of course, where are they going to put all these people now? They're herding them. 2 million people, they're herding them to a little tiny area right by Egypt and right by the sea. So how much more evidence do we need that this is their plan, that their plan all along? I mean, people like myself have been saying all along, this is the plan, is to get rid of these people somehow, and they're going to just keep shoving them south. And this is what they're going to do, and this is what they've done. So at what point are people going to speak up and say, this is genocide, this is ethnic cleansing, that is what this is? And the Israelis could sit there and say until they're blue in the face, no, that's not what this is at all. We are humane, we are moral, we warn people. Somebody actually posted on X the comment of, well, you know, what kind of military? I mean, Israel's so great. They're so wonderful that they actually tell people to evacuate. They say, what other military in the world actually calls people and says, evacuate, you're in a war area, we're coming, we're going to bomb you, we're going to bomb that area, you need to get out. And this person was trying to say, so isn't Israel so wonderful because they're actually evacuating people? And no, the answer to that is, look, this war is over land. That's what this war is over. So if Israel's calling all these people and say, get off the land, no, that is not this nice humanitarian thing to do. that's a strategy towards winning their end goal in the war, which is to gain the land and to get rid of these people. That's what they're doing. There's nothing humane or moral about this. But we're watching this plan being implemented in real time, and the U.S. government has the power to stop it. They have the power to sit Israel down and say, you will get no more funding from us. We will not be complicit in your genocide, in your ethnic cleansing campaign. We're not going to stand by and let you do this. In fact, we should be fighting them. In fact, we should be rescuing the Palestinian people from the ethnic cleansing campaign that they're clearly being under, that they're clearly that is happening to them, and that's been happening to them for a long time. But instead, we're just giving soft suggestions to Israel, watching them slaughter more hundreds of people and saying, I think they're trying. I think so. I think they're, fewer kids were killed, I think. Meanwhile, when it comes to the hospitals, right, we've seen this go on in Israel this whole time. They've been targeting hospitals and saying, well, that's because Hamas is there. It's not our fault. Human shields. Well, today, the WHO received notification that the Israelis were going to be bombing the WHO in Gaza. Like I said, I always thought the WHO was maybe a terrorist organization, and now that the IDF is confirming it, that the WHO is Hamas, it turns out. Here's the tweet from Dr. Tedros. He's the head of the WHO. He says, today, the WHO received notification from the Israeli Defense Forces that we should remove our supplies from our medical warehouse in southern Gaza within 24 hours, as ground operations will put it beyond use. We appeal to Israel to withdraw the order and take every possible measure to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure, including hospitals and humanitarian facilities. So there it is. I mean, Israel's even going after the WHO. Nobody is safe. Nobody is safe from Israel trying to annihilate all of the resources for the Gazan people to keep them safe and to keep them thriving to some degree, to keep them alive in Gaza. They're targeting they're targeting all of their main infrastructure. The main infrastructure being the infrastructure for medical care. They're targeting schools. They've been blowing up schools. They've been blowing up hospitals. They've been rendering them useless. And they say, oh, no, but it's because Hamas. I guess the WHO is a Hamas headquarters now. So it's Hamas. It's because of Hamas. And really what they're doing is they're trying to get the situation so dire for the Gazans that they jump on the boats or they jump into the sea and they start swimming, or to try to get to Egypt. They do everything they can to get themselves into Egypt. They're trying to make it so dire and so desperate that these people will do anything to get out of there. That's their goal. And this is one of the ways, by targeting the WHO. I mean, I make a joke out of it, but there's really no joke about this. This is a really terrible thing to be targeting one of the last bits of infrastructure the Gazans have for medical supplies. And they're going after the WHO. They've gone after journalists. They've gone after... And they all say, they use the same excuse, and you can choose to believe it or not. You could choose to just close your eyes and ears and say, well, they told me it was for a good reason, so it must be. Or you could just believe all of the evidence that's out there in front of all of us, which is this is an ethnic cleansing campaign. If this is not genocide, I do not know what the term means. People believe that in order for there to be genocide, you have to kill everybody. That is not the case. You only need to keep the numbers low enough to where they're not a problem for you. Right? They're a minority. One way a genocide could be an ethnic cleansing campaign for purity. Right? It could be because you just want one type of people living in your area, in your community. You don't want these others because you find them filthy or whatever reason you deem them unpleasant and you don't want them around at all. So one of the reasons for genocide could be purity, but another reason could be for majority, because you want to remain in power. You want to remain the majority. So what you do is you thin out the population of the others to keep yourself in a position of power by maintaining majority. And that is what Israel's doing. People point to Israel and they say, well, they've got Arabs living in Israel. 20% of the population are Palestinians who are still in Israel. Yeah, well, they're not a threat. They're only 20%. They have absolutely no political power. They are a minority of a minority. And so they have no political power whatsoever. And that is one way that you keep, you stay in power, is by just keeping the numbers low, by thinning out the numbers to the point where they do not pose any single threat to you. And that is what these Israelis are trying to do with Gaza. They're thinning down the numbers so that if they were forced to somehow integrate these people in, or if they're forced to have to care for them and to rebuild, that it's for a minimal group of people, small numbers, no real threat to Israel. In a democratic situation, these people will not be able to vote their way into changing Israel's society, or just if they were to be forced to integrate them the way the world wants them to, at least that integrating would be minor because there's just not that many of them and there's way more of us. So genocide could happen to maintain majority, not just for purity. And that is an important point for people to remember. All right, guys, that is it for tonight's show. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you being here. Appreciate you watching. Love hearing from you. If you want to email me and give me your thoughts, suggestions, kim@kimiverson.com. Otherwise, guys, we will be back again tomorrow night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, with another great show. Until then, have a good night. Bye-bye.